Chapter 1. The Price of Blood. The wind carried the scent of smoke and pine through the broken halls of Sindral Keep. Once, this place had been alive with feasts, banners, and the laughter of kin. Now the stones seemed colder, the hearths emptier, as if the death of Lord Sindral had drained the very spirit from the walls. Ilara stood at the threshold, her fingers brushing against the carved wooden doorframe her father had once touched with pride. She was wrapped in a threadbare cloak of green wool, her hair tumbling down her back in waves of midnight silk. Her eyes, clear, fierce, and haunted by sorrow, watched the last rays of the sun vanish beyond the treetops. It should have been her brother's duty to protect her, to shield the last remnant of their bloodline from ruin, but Aldrich, the new lord of Sindral, had proven himself weaker than whispers dared to name. The sound of men's voices echoed from the great hall, low and harsh, like wolves circling prey. Ilara hesitated in the shadows of the corridor, her pulse quickening. She should not listen, but something in the tone of her brother's words chilled her blood. She moved silently, pressing herself against the cold stone, listening from behind the heavy oaken doors. "I have nothing left," Aldrich's voice broke, tinged with drunken slur. "No coin, no livestock. The men I borrowed from will slit my throat if I cannot repay them. What choice remains?" Another voice answered, deep and steady, with the weight of command. "You knew the cost when you made your bargains. A commander does not barter with fools and then cry of ruin." Ilara's breath caught. She had never heard this man before. His words were steel, his tone measured. "I beg you," Aldrich pressed on, "give me more time. The harvest—" "There will be no harvest," the stranger cut him off. "Your fields lie barren. Your people starve. Time will not pay your debts." Ilara's stomach twisted, dread creeping through her veins. A pause followed, filled only by the crackle of the hall's fire. Then Aldrich's voice dropped lower, hoarse with desperation. "You can take her." Silence. Ilara's heart slammed against her ribs. She pressed a hand to her mouth to keep from gasping. Surely she had misheard. The stranger's voice came slow, deliberate. "You speak of your sister?" "Yes," Aldrich said, too quickly, too eagerly. "She is young, comely, unspoiled, the last beauty of our house. She can be your wife, your prize. Take her in place of coin." The words rang through Ilara's ears like the tolling of a funeral bell. Her own brother, the boy who had once held her hand by the river, who had sworn to protect her after their father's death, was offering her life to settle his debts. Her knees nearly gave way, but rage steadied her. The stranger's reply was slower this time, his voice carrying something that was not quite agreement. "I came to claim what was promised, yet you offer me a woman, not a purse of silver. Do you take me for a slaver, Aldrich?" "She will keep you loyal," Aldrich stammered. "She will bind your men to you with the honor of marriage. You will have Sindral's blood joined to yours. That is worth more than coin, surely." Ilara could bear it no longer. She pushed the doors open and stepped inside. The hall was dimly lit, shadows leaping across the stone from the great hearth. Her brother sat slouched in a chair, a goblet in his hand, his eyes bloodshot and hollow. Across from him stood the stranger, a towering figure clad in leather and steel, a wolf pelt cloak draped across his shoulders. His hair was dark, his jaw strong, his posture commanding. He turned at once as she entered, his eyes sharp as blades, locking onto hers. "You speak of me?" As if I were not here, Elara said, her voice calm, though fury laced every word. Aldrich leapt to his feet, startled. Elara, no, she snapped, her eyes burning into him. You would sell me as though I were a trinket at market? Your own sister? Your blood? Aldrich faltered, sweat beading on his brow. You do not understand. They would kill me. Then let them, she hissed, stepping closer, her small frame trembling with righteous fire. Better you lose your life than trade mine. The stranger watched her, his expression unreadable. There was no lust in his eyes, no cruelty, only a piercing calculation, as though weighing her soul. At last, he spoke. You have courage, lady. His voice was low, steady, carrying the weight of mountains. Few would face their brother so. Elara turned her glare on him. And you? What do you say to this bargain? Will you take a woman as though she were coin? For the briefest moment, something softened in his eyes. I did not come seeking a bride, he said, but I do not refuse what fate offers. If I take you, it will not be as a slave, it will be as my wife. Elara's lips parted, disbelief warring with outrage. Your wife? You speak as if my will matters not at all. It is not your brother's will I honor, he said. It is my own oath. If you are given to me, you will be under my protection. No man will touch you. No man will dishonor you. You will want for nothing. Nothing? Elara's laugh was bitter. I will want for freedom, and that you cannot give me. The warrior's jaw tightened, but he did not look away. Freedom, he said quietly, is a fragile thing in these times. But life is worth fighting for. I will keep yours safe, even if you curse me for it. Aldrich sank back into his chair, relief flooding his weak features. Then it is settled. No, Elara whispered, but the word carried no power here. The warrior stepped forward, bowing his head slightly, not in mockery, but in acknowledgement. I am Kyle, he said, commander of the Iron Wolves. From this night forth, you are mine. Elara's heart pounded. The hall seemed to close around her, the flames crackling louder, the shadows pressing closer. Her brother had sold her, her fate sealed in a single breath. Yet as Kyle's gaze held hers, steady and unwavering, she felt something she had not expected. Not comfort, not safety, but the strange, terrifying spark of a man who might not break her, but change her. And she swore, even as her world crumbled, if she must walk into this fate, she would do so with her head high and her spirit unbroken. Chapter 2. The Warrior's Claim. The morning was cold when Elara left the only home she had ever known. Mist clung to the forest, wrapping the trees in a pale shroud. The gates of Sindral Keep creaked as they swung open, and Elara's heart sank as her brother's lands fell behind her, with every clop of the horse's hooves. She rode not alone, but perched behind Kale upon his great black stallion, her hands clutching the saddle as the beast thundered over uneven paths. His wolfskin cloak brushed against her, heavy with the scent of pine and iron. Every breath she took was filled with the reality of him, the solid weight of a warrior forged for battle, the man to whom her fate had been bartered. Kale said nothing at first. His silence was not that of indifference, but of a man used to command without needless words. His men trailed behind on horseback, armored and scarred, their laughter coarse and rough as they cut through the morning fog. They were not the kind of men who dwelt in courts or feasts. They were wolves, hard-eyed, carrying the hunger of battle in their very stride. Elara swallowed the knot in her throat. She would not tremble. If Kyle expected her to weep and beg, he would find no such weakness in her. At last, her voice broke the silence. "You think me your prize," she said, her tone sharp as frost. "But I will not yield to you, not in heart, not in soul." Kyle's head turned slightly, just enough that she caught the glint of his eyes under the wolf pelt hood. There was no anger there, only quiet amusement, like a man used to defiance. "I do not need your surrender, lady," he said simply. "Only your presence at my side. In time, you will see I am not your enemy." Her fingers tightened against the saddle. "You took me against my will. That makes you no better than the men you lead." Kyle's voice remained calm, steady. "You think I wanted this? I came for honor, not a bride. But your brother made his choice. Had I refused, another would have taken you, and you would have no voice left at all." His words struck her harder than she expected. She wanted to deny them, to spit at him for daring to excuse himself, but deep in her chest she knew he spoke truth. Her brother would have bartered her to the next man with silver in hand. Elara turned her face away, her voice low and trembling despite her resolve. "You may keep my body by force of circumstance, Kale of the Iron Wolves, but my heart is mine. Alone." He did not answer at once. The silence stretched long enough that she thought he would let her words fall away, unheeded. Then at last he said quietly, "Keep it then. I do not take what is not freely given." The simplicity of the words unsettled her more than threats ever could. They traveled all day, the road winding north into the foothills. By dusk they reached a clearing by a rushing river. The men dismounted, loosening saddles, setting fires, and roasting game caught along the way. Their voices rose in rough songs, ballads of battles, of comrades lost and victories won. Elara sat apart, her cloak drawn tightly, her gaze fixed on the flames. Hunger gnawed at her belly, but pride kept her silent. She would not eat at their table, not drink their mead, not smile at their laughter. Kyle approached after a time, holding a trencher of bread and roasted meat. He lowered himself beside her, his presence filling the space between them like shadow and fire. "You've not eaten," he said. She lifted her chin, her eyes hard. "I would sooner starve." His expression did not change. He placed the food on the ground before her, within reach. "You will eat," he said firmly, "not because I command it, but because strength will keep you alive. You will need it for the road ahead. I do not need your care," she whispered, though her stomach betrayed her with a painful twist. His gaze held hers. "Perhaps not, but you will have it, whether you wish it or no." With that he rose, leaving the plate untouched before her. Elara stared at the food, anger and hunger warring inside her chest. At last, when no one watched, she tore off a piece of bread, chewing in silence. Later, the camp quieted. Men drifted to sleep beneath firs, their snores mingling with the sound of the river. Elara sat awake, staring at the stars pricking the sky, her mind restless. A voice broke the stillness. "You watch the night as if it holds answers." Kyle again. He had not sought his rest, but stood nearby, his great form outlined by firelight. His sword rested across his lap, his hand absent but steady on the hilt. Elara did not turn to him. "The stars are free," she said softly. "No man commands their path. No man commands yours either," he said. Her laugh was bitter. "You speak as though I did not ride here under your shadow, with chains of my brother's making. Kyle's tone sharpened. Chains bind the body, not the spirit. You carry yourself as one who refuses to be broken. She looked at him then, truly looked, the hard line of his jaw, the scars across his knuckles, the storm that lived in his eyes. He was a man who had known battles beyond her imagining, yet he spoke to her as though her defiance mattered. "Why do you care?" she whispered. "What am I to you? Save payment for my brother's folly." Kyle was silent for a long moment. The fire popped, sending sparks into the air. Finally he answered, "You are not coin, you are not cattle. You are a woman wronged by blood that should have cherished you. I do not take lightly what others cast aside." Ilara's breath caught. She wanted to hate him, to turn her heart to stone, but a flicker of something else stirred within her, a spark of confusion, of reluctant intrigue. She turned away quickly, pulling her cloak tighter. "Words are wind, Kyle. I will judge you by deeds, not vows." He inclined his head, as though her challenge pleased him. "Then watch closely, Ilara of Sindral. My deeds will speak louder than you expect." By dawn, the company broke camp. The men's laughter returned, their spirits light despite the grueling march. Ilara rode again behind Kyle, her body weary, her mind restless. The forest thinned as they pressed north, revealing the first glimpse of mountains shrouded in mist. The sight stole Ilara's breath. The peaks rose high and jagged, their crowns wrapped in snow. Even in the warmth of spring, somewhere within those mountains lay Kyle's fortress, the place that would become her prison or her destiny. She closed her eyes, the wind tugging at her hair. For the first time, fear gave way not only to dread, but to a strange, dangerous question. What if Kyle spoke true? What if he was not her captor, but her protector? The thought was madness, and yet, as the horse carried her further from all she had known, it lingered, heavy and unshakable. Chapter 3. A Fortress of Wolves. The mountains swallowed them. The road wound upward through forests of pine and oak, the air growing sharper, the sun pale against peaks capped in white. Ilara felt the chill creep beneath her cloak as the company pressed on, Kyle's great black stallion carrying them higher into a world that felt more the realm of spirits than men. By the third day of travel, mist lay heavy across the cliffs. Ravens wheeled overhead, their cries echoing against stone. The warriors of the Iron Wolves seemed unfazed. Their laughter rang against the mountainside, their boots steady on the rocky paths, their voices raised in rough songs that Ilara could barely understand. Her gaze, however, clung to the man before her. Kyle rode with unshaken calm, his back straight, his hand steady on the reins. He carried himself like the mountain itself, immovable, unyielding, silent yet watchful. At last, as dusk settled, the fortress came into view. It rose from the mountainside like a beast carved of black stone. Walls so tall they seemed to touch the clouds. Towers crowned its corners, and great iron banners rippled in the wind, each bearing the snarling wolf sigil of Kyle's warband. Smoke curled from chimneys within, and the glow of firelight cast a fierce orange against the mist. Ilara's breath caught. It was not a castle of courts and courtiers, of feasts and ballads. This was a keep of war, built not for beauty but for strength. The great gates groaned open, chains rattling, and the warriors rode into the Wide courtyard. Men spilled from the training yard. Hounds barked, and the clang of steel rang from anvils. This was no place of silks or soft songs. This was a place where blood was spilled, where steel was sharpened, where men lived as wolves among stone. Elara of Sindral. Kyle's voice broke her thoughts. He turned slightly, his eyes locking on hers. This is my home, and now it will be yours. Her lips pressed into a thin line. A gilded cage is still a cage. His gaze held hers for a long moment, and then he turned his stallion toward the center of the yard. The men dismounted, their voices rising in cheer at their commander's return. "Kale returns!" a broad-shouldered warrior bellowed, his scarred face breaking into a grin. "And with a lady at his side?" Another jeered, laughter rolling through the company. Elara stiffened, fire sparking in her chest. She would not be mocked like a prize displayed at market. Before she could speak, however, Kyle's voice rang across the courtyard, deep and commanding. "She is under my protection," he thundered, his gaze sweeping his men. "Any tongue that speaks against her speaks against me, and that I do not forgive." The laughter died at once. The warriors lowered their gazes, bowing their heads. Elara's heart thudded. For all his silence, Kyle's word was law here. Inside the fortress, he led her through wide halls lit with torchlight. The air smelled of pine and smoke, of steel and leather. Elara's fingers trailed across the cold stone as they passed chambers where men feasted, where armor hung on racks, where wolves, real wolves, lay curled by the hearth, their golden eyes following her steps. At last, he stopped before a heavy door carved with runes. Pushing it open, he revealed a chamber larger than she expected. A great bed of carved oak stood draped in furs, a hearth already blazing, casting a golden warmth against stone walls. Tapestries of battles past hung upon the walls, their threads telling stories of men and wolves, of victories long won. Elara turned to him, wary. "And where will you sleep?" Kyle's mouth curved faintly, though not in mockery. "Not here. This is your chamber, your own." Her breath caught. She had steeled herself for the worst, that he would demand her bed, her body, her obedience. Yet instead, he offered space, distance. "You surprise me, Kyle," she said quietly. He tilted his head, his eyes sharp and unreadable. "Do you think me so base, Elara, that I would take what is not freely given?" Her throat tightened, though she masked it with coldness. "You already took me from my home. I took you from your brother," he corrected. "Do not mistake the two." And with that, he left her to the firelight and silence. Days turned to a rhythm within the fortress. Elara wandered its courtyards and halls. Her presence watched yet never hindered. Some men greeted her with nods of respect, others with guarded curiosity. None dared insult her after Kyle's warning. She came to see the way his men revered him. He did not command from a distance. He trained beside them, his sword flashing in the practice yard, his blows swift and sure. He bled with them, feasted with them, laughed with them when victories were won. Their loyalty was not born of fear, but of respect. One morning she lingered at the edge of the yard as Kyle sparred with 3 men at once. His movements were a dance of steel and strength, his blade striking with the precision of a predator. Sweat gleamed on his brow, his breath steady despite the weight of combat. When at last he disarmed them all, laughter and cheers rose from the men. Elara felt her chest tighten. He was not merely a warrior, he was a leader, born of fire and iron. But why, she wondered, had he chosen her? That night, At supper, she dared to ask. The hall was loud with laughter, mugs clashing, hounds begging at the tables. Kyle sat at the head, Ilara beside him, her trencher filled, though her appetite wavered. She leaned closer, her voice low so only he could hear. You could have demanded gold, lands, anything. Why me? Kyle drank deeply from his mug before setting it down. His eyes never left hers. Because you are not a thing to be bartered, and yet your brother treated you as such. I will prove him wrong. Her lips parted. Prove him wrong? By keeping me here like some jewel locked in stone? His expression softened. By making you my equal, not my captive. Her heart stumbled. She turned away quickly, lest he see the storm in her eyes, but not all within the fortress welcomed her. One evening, as she crossed the courtyard alone, a woman stepped into her path, tall and fierce, her hair a blaze of red, her eyes sharp as daggers. You do not belong here, the woman hissed. Ilara stiffened, her chin lifting. And who are you to tell me where I belong? I am Freya, the woman said coldly. I have fought at Kale's side for years. I have bled for him. You are nothing but a southern pawn, bought like cattle. The words stung like a blade. Ilara's hands trembled, though she hid them within her cloak. I did not choose this fate, but if you think I will cower, you are mistaken. Freya's eyes narrowed, fire burning within. Then be warned. Wolves do not suffer weaklings. Before more could be said, a voice thundered across the yard. Freya! Both women turned. Kyle stood at the steps, his gaze cold as steel. Enough, his tone cut sharper than a blade. You will leave her be. Freya stiffened, fury flashing in her eyes, but she bowed her head. As you command, my lord. She swept away, her cloak snapping behind her. Ilara's heart pounded, the air between her and Kale heavy with silence. That night, in her chamber, he came to her. His face was drawn, his voice low. Freya was once close to me, he admitted, closer than she should have been. But I made no promises to her. She will learn to accept you. Ilara searched his eyes, the firelight flickering across them. Why do you defend me so fiercely, Kale? You owe me nothing. His steps brought him nearer, his shadow falling over her. His voice dropped, raw and unguarded. I owe you everything, for though you were given to me against your will, I swear this. You will never know harm while I draw breath, not from enemies, not from my own. The oath struck her like a blow, too fierce, too binding. Her heart raced, her breath caught, and in the silence that followed, she felt the ground shift beneath her. Fear still lingered, but with it came something else, something far more dangerous. Hope. Chapter 4. Whispers of rebellion. The days at the fortress settled into a rhythm Ilara could not ignore. She woke to the clang of steel in the training yards, the smell of smoke and iron carried through the stone halls. She walked among warriors who gave her respectful nods but little warmth, for though Kyle's word protected her, she was still an outsider. Yet her defiance did not fade. She carried herself with dignity, her chin lifted, her gaze steady. She would not let them see her as weak. She would not let Kyle think she had softened toward him, though in the dark of night she could not deny how his words lingered in her heart. It was on the 10th night that whispers began to reach her ears. She was in the lower halls, speaking quietly with an older servant woman who brought her meals when two warriors passed by, not knowing she lingered in the shadows. Their voices were low, but the stone walls carried every word. The clans stir in the east, one said. They say Kale grows weak, that he keeps a southern lady in his halls, while his men wait for war. The other spat on the floor. Fools, they know nothing of Kyle. He has never been weak. Perhaps not, the first muttered. But men follow strength, not patience. If they think he is distracted, rebellion will fester, and if his enemies unite, their voices faded as they disappeared down the corridor. But Alara stood frozen, her heart thudded. Rebellion, distrust, and her name tied to Kale's supposed weakness. She could not push the words from her mind. That night, when Kale came to sit by the fire in her chamber, as he often did, saying little, simply existing in silence beside her, she turned to him. They speak against you, she said softly. His eyes opened, steady and calm. Who speaks? Your own men, she whispered. They think you distracted, weakened by me. Kyle's gaze lingered on her, and for the first time she saw the shadow of weariness there. He did not deny it. War has been at my heels since I was old enough to hold a sword, he said quietly. I have spilled blood until my hands could hold no more. If I pause now, if I seek to build instead of destroy, they call me weak. Such is the way of men who only know how to kill. Alara leaned closer, her voice trembling despite herself. And am I the cause of their unrest? His gaze softened, though his words held weight. You are the spark they blame, but not the fire. The fire was always there, waiting. Silence stretched between them, heavy as stone. Finally she whispered, Why do you tell me these things? Kyle's eyes burned in the firelight. Because you asked, and because I would rather you know the truth than the lies whispered in the dark. The next day, Alara found herself restless. She wandered into the library, a narrow chamber lined with shelves of worn scrolls and leather-bound tomes. Dust lay thick on them, as if knowledge itself was a forgotten luxury in a fortress built for war. Her fingers traced the spines until she came to a book half hidden, its cover cracked. Its title faded. She opened it and gasped softly. It was not a tale of battle. It was poetry, old, lyrical, filled with words of longing and devotion. Strange. Kyle's voice rumbled behind her, making her start. She had not heard him enter. I did not think you would find that one. She turned, the book clutched to her chest. You keep poetry in a warrior's hall? A faint smile ghosted his lips. Even wolves dream, Alara. Her breath caught at the words. She lowered her gaze to the pages. Did you read these? I did once, he admitted, when I was younger, before war consumed every hour of my days. Her eyes lifted. Then perhaps you are not as different from me as I thought. Kyle's gaze lingered on her, unguarded for once. Perhaps not. For a moment the air between them shifted, less like a prisoner and captor, more like two souls bound by circumstance, yet finding fragments of common ground. But before the moment could settle, a commotion rose in the courtyard below. Shouts, the clash of steel. Kyle was gone in an instant, striding from the chamber with the speed of a storm. Alara followed, heart racing, down into the yard. There she saw them, 3 strangers, bound and bloodied, dragged into the fortress by Kyle's men. Their clothes bore the markings of rival clans, their faces twisted with defiance despite their capture. One spat at the ground before Kyle's boots. Your reign ends soon, Wolf Lord. Others gather in secret. You cannot fight us all. The yard went silent. Every man awaited Kyle's reply. He stood still, his presence filling the space with thunderous quiet. Then his voice rang out, cold and unyielding. "Tell your masters this. If they come for me, they will find not weakness, but steel. And if they dare touch what is mine," his gaze flicked briefly to Alara, "they will beg for death before I am through." The men were dragged away, their curses echoing in the yard. Alara's breath came fast. She had seen Kael's strength in training. In the quiet way his men obeyed him. But here, in the face of rebellion, she saw the storm inside. Him. That night she could not sleep. She paced her chamber until Kael returned, his armor set aside, his eyes heavy with thought. "Tell me truthfully," she demanded, her voice trembling. "Will there be war?" Kael's silence was answer enough. "Yes," he said finally, "there will be war." Her knees weakened, and she sank into the chair by the fire. "And it is because of me, because they see me as your distraction." Kael crossed the room, kneeling before her so that his eyes met hers. His voice was low, steady, carrying the weight of a vow. "No, Alara, do not take their venom as truth. Rebellion was in their hearts long before you came. If anything, you give me reason to fight not only for survival, but for more." Her lips parted. "For more?" His gaze burned into hers, fierce and unguarded. "For a future worth the blood." Her heart stuttered, her breath shallow. She wanted to look away, to shield herself from the intensity in his eyes, but she could not. For in that moment, she realized something terrifying. She no longer knew if she feared him, or feared the way her heart quickened when he was near. Chapter 5. Chains of the Heart. The days after the rebels' capture hung heavy with unease. The fortress no longer rang with laughter in the halls or easy banter in the training yard. Whispers spread like smoke in the wind, clans plotting in secret, enemies watching from the shadows of the mountains. And in the heart of it all, Alara. She felt eyes on her wherever she went. Some were curious, some hostile, some merely cautious, but it was not their stares that unsettled her most. It was the weight of Kael's gaze, the way he watched her, not with ownership, but with something far more dangerous, something that stirred an answering ache within her. One evening, when the moon was a pale sickle above the peaks, Kael summoned her to the ramparts. The wind cut sharp against her cheeks as she joined him at the wall. The valley spread wide beneath them. Fires glimmered far in the distance, villages clinging to the mountainsides, small sparks of life in the vast dark. "Do you see them?" Kael asked, his voice low, almost reverent. Alara followed his gaze. "The villages?" He nodded. "Every light out there belongs to a family. Men, women, children who depend on my strength to keep them safe. If the clans rise against me, it is not only my men who bleed. It is them." She studied him, the torchlight flickering across the hard lines of his face. "You carry so much on your shoulders." He gave a faint, humorless smile. "I was born to it. When my father fell, I was scarcely more than a boy, but there was no choice. The wolves needed a leader. The clans needed a wall of iron. Did you never wish for another life?" she asked softly. His eyes met hers, and in them she saw a depth she had not expected. "Every man dreams of peace, Alara, but peace is not given, it is won." The wind pulled at her cloak, and she shivered. Before she could step back, Kael's hand brushed her arm, lightly, briefly, but enough to send warmth flooding through her despite the cold. "You should not linger in the wind," he said. "Come inside." Yet neither of them moved. They stood too close. The silence stretched too long, and Elara felt her heart pounding like a drum of war. At last she pulled away, breaking the moment. "Good night, Kyle." His gaze lingered as she left, unspoken words hanging between them. But not everyone wished her well. Freya's shadow lingered like a storm cloud. The red-haired shield maiden watched Elara with eyes sharp as daggers. More than once, Elara felt her presence behind her in the halls, or heard her voice carried on the wind in bitter whispers. It was late one afternoon when the confrontation came. Elara was in the stables, her hand brushing the flank of Kyle's black stallion when Freya stepped into the straw-scented air. "You play a dangerous game, Southern girl," Freya said coldly. Elara stiffened, turning slowly. "And what game is that? Kyle may claim you are under his protection," Freya sneered, "but protection fades, affection fades. Do not think you will ever hold his heart. He was mine before you came." Elara's pulse quickened, but she forced steel into her voice. "If he was yours, then why does he stand with me now?" The blow landed. Freya's eyes narrowed, her lips curling. "Because you are a novelty, a jewel to display until he tires of you. And when war comes, and it will, you will not survive it. You are too soft." Elara lifted her chin. "Perhaps you mistake kindness for weakness." For a moment, Freya's hand twitched as if to strike her, but footsteps echoed at the stable door, and Kale's shadow fell long across the straw. "Freya," he said, his voice sharp as frost. The shield maiden turned, her fury barely leashed. "You dishonor yourself, Kyle. You dishonor me. Leave us," he commanded. For a heartbeat, Elara thought Freya would defy him. But at last, the woman spat to the ground and stormed out, her cloak snapping like a banner in the wind. Silence followed. Kyle turned to Elara, his jaw tight. "Did she harm you?" "No," Elara said quietly, "but she hates me." His gaze softened, his voice low. "Freya clings to the past, but it is the past. Do not fear her." Her breath trembled, words slipping out before she could stop them. "And what of the future?" Kyle's eyes burned into hers, and in that moment the distance between them vanished. His hand lifted, cupping her cheek with a touch that was both fierce and gentle. "Elara." His voice was a whisper, rough with restraint. Her heart raced. She should have pulled away. She should have remembered the chains that bound her fate to his. But when his lips brushed hers, light searching as if he asked permission rather than demanded, she could not resist. The kiss deepened, slow and aching, fire sparking through her veins. She clutched his tunic, her knees weak, her soul torn between fear and yearning. When at last he drew back, his breath ragged, his forehead rested against hers. "Forgive me," he whispered. "I swore I would not take what was not freely given." Her voice shook. "Do you think I did not give it?" Silence. Then Kyle's arms closed around her, pulling her against him, his embrace a fortress against the world. For the first time since her brother's betrayal, Elara felt safe, and yet, even as her heart soared, shadows lingered, for outside the fortress walls, rebellion gathered strength, and within, jealousy and betrayal festered still. It was 3 nights later when the betrayal struck. The alarm bells clanged in the dead of night, their iron tolls shaking the fortress from slumber. Elara bolted upright in her bed, hand, the sound of shouts and steel echoing through the halls. She rushed to the window and saw torches blazing at the gates, enemies swarming, their war cries piercing the night. Her door burst open. Kyle strode in, armored and armed, his eyes blazing like fire. "Stay here," he ordered. "No," Alara cried. "If you fall—" He seized her hand, pressing it to his chest, where his heart pounded strong beneath steel. "I will not fall, not while you wait for me." And then he was gone, swept into the storm of battle. Alara's breath came fast, her hands trembling. She could not obey, not this time. She slipped into the corridor, heart racing, following the clash of steel and the roar of war. In the courtyard, chaos reigned. Kyle's men fought fiercely, but the attackers had slipped past the outer defenses, and at the heart of it, Freya. Alara froze. The shield maiden stood with the enemy, her blade dripping red, her eyes blazing with betrayal. "You chose her over me," Freya roared at Kyle as their swords clashed. "Then let her watch you die." Alara's cry tore from her throat, lost in the din of battle. She saw Kyle's blade flash, saw Freya's fury, and knew with a sickening certainty this fight was not only for survival, it was for love. Chapter 6. The storm breaks. Steel clashed against steel, cries of pain and fury rising into the night. The great gates shuddered under the assault, splinters raining as enemy clans pressed forward, their torches painting the walls in firelight. Alara stood frozen at the edge of the chaos, her heart hammering so loud she could scarcely hear the battle. Everywhere she looked, men fought like wolves. Kyle's warriors holding the line, their swords slick with blood, their faces grim with defiance. But her gaze found only one man, Kyle. He moved like a storm through the melee, his blade flashing silver, his shield a wall of iron. He cut down foe after foe, his presence a beacon his men rallied around. Yet even as she watched, her blood ran cold. Freya was there. The red-haired shield maiden fought with fury, her betrayal blazing brighter than any torch. She carved through Kyle's men with savage skill, her eyes burning with hatred as they locked on her former commander. "You should have been mine," she screamed, her voice carrying above the din. "But you chose her, a southern weakling, a caged bird, over me." Her blade clashed with Kyle's, sparks flying. Their duel rang louder than the battle around them. Alara's breath caught, fear knotting in her chest. She wanted to look away, but she could not. Kyle's voice thundered between strikes. "You shame yourself, Freya. You shame all we have fought for, and you shame me." Freya spat. Her blade drove harder, faster. "If I cannot have you, then I will take your fortress, and I will take her life before your eyes." Alara gasped, stumbling back as Freya's gaze flicked to her. The moment of distraction cost Kyle. Freya's sword grazed his shoulder, crimson spilling down his arm. He did not falter, but Alara's cry pierced the air. "Kyle!" His eyes found hers, even amidst the storm, and for that heartbeat she saw not the Iron Wolf, not the warlord, but the man who had sworn to protect her. Strength surged through him. With a roar, he drove Freya back, their blades ringing like thunder. But she was relentless, her fury a fire that would not burn out easily. Meanwhile, the fortress teetered on the brink. The enemy had breached the lower gates, warriors flooding the courtyards. Alara pressed against the stone, her breath ragged, her mind screaming to run, but she could not leave Kyle. A hand seized her arm. She spun, ready to scream, but found not an enemy. One of Kyle's older captains stood there, his face grim. "Lady," "You must come. They will cut you down if you stay here." "I won't leave him," she cried, struggling against his grip. "You'll dishonor his fight if you fall now," the man said sharply. "Live, and you give him strength. Die, and you give him grief." Tears burned her eyes. For a moment she faltered, torn between fear and defiance. Then a sound split the night, a horn's deep bellow, rolling across the mountains. Reinforcements. The iron wolves howled as the gates of the inner keep burst open, fresh warriors pouring into the fray. The tide began to turn, enemies faltering under the renewed assault. Kyle pressed Freya hard now, his blade a blur, his strikes fueled by more than rage, by purpose. Their swords locked, faces inches apart, breath ragged. "Yield, Freya," Kyle growled. "Do not make me end this." Her eyes burned with madness. "I will never yield." With a cry, she lunged. Kyle's blade flashed, striking true. Silence rippled across the yard as Freya fell, her sword clattering against the stones. She lay gasping, red staining her lips, her eyes still burning with unquenched fury. "You could have loved me," she rasped, her voice fading, "but you chose her." Her last breath escaped, and her body stilled. Ilara's knees weakened, her hand gripping the wall for balance. She had hated Freya's scorn, feared her threats, but in this moment she saw only the tragedy of a woman consumed by love turned poison. Kyle stood over the fallen shield maiden, his chest heaving, blood streaking his arm. Slowly his gaze lifted to Ilara. She ran to him. He caught her against him, his arms iron despite the blood and exhaustion. She pressed her face to his chest, his heartbeat thundering beneath her cheek. "I thought I would lose you," she whispered, her voice breaking. His hand cradled the back of her head, his voice rough. "You will never lose me, not while I breathe." Around them, the fortress roared in victory as the last of the rebels fled into the night. But Ilara heard none of it. In Kyle's arms, all the world fell silent, leaving only the fragile truth between them. Later, in the quiet after battle, Kyle sat in his chamber, his arm bound, his body weary, but unbroken. Ilara knelt beside him, tending to the shallow cuts the healers had overlooked. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the memory of almost losing him. "You should have stayed in your chambers," Kyle murmured, his gaze soft, though his words carried weight. "And let you fight alone?" she whispered. "Never." His eyes burned into hers. "Ilara, why do you risk yourself so?" Her lips trembled. "Because you are no longer just my captor. You are," she faltered, breath shaking, "you are my heart." The words hung between them, fragile and terrifying. Kyle's hand caught hers, his grip strong, his voice breaking with emotion he could no longer hide. "And you are mine, my treasure, my reason to fight, to endure, to live." His lips claimed hers then, no longer hesitant but fierce, desperate, as if the battle had stripped away every wall between them. She melted into him, their kiss a vow stronger than any forged in stone or steel. Outside, the fortress licked its wounds, but within something new was born. Hope, fierce and unyielding, forged in fire and bound in chains of the heart. Chapter 7. A treasured bride. The fortress was quiet in the days after the battle, but it was not the stillness of peace. It was the hush of a storm gathering strength again. The men sharpened their blades and repaired the gates, their laughter muted, their eyes shadowed. They knew the night's assault had only been been the beginning. Elara felt it too. The air seemed heavier, each sunrise colder, as if the mountains themselves held their breath. Kyle moved among his men with the same unshakable strength, but Elara saw the weight pressing on him. He carried it in his shoulders, in the lines around his eyes. He had won, but the cost had carved deeper into him than he would admit. One night she found him alone in the great hall, the fire burning low. His sword lay across his knees, his gaze fixed on the flames. "You should rest," she whispered, stepping into the glow. His eyes lifted, weary but warm. "I cannot. Not while the clans gather. They will come again, stronger, hungrier. This was but a test of my walls." She moved closer, her voice trembling. "Then let me be your strength. You've carried this burden alone for too long." Kyle's lips curved faintly, though sorrow touched his eyes. "You were never meant for this life of blood and iron, Elara. You deserve freedom, gentler lands, softer days." "And yet," she said, her voice steady, "I would not trade this fate. Not if it means leaving you." His breath caught, his hand rising to touch her cheek, calloused fingers trembling against her skin. "Elara!" Her hand covered his, firm and unyielding. "Do not shut me out. I am not your captive anymore. I am your equal. Let me stand with you." For a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then Kyle leaned forward, his lips brushing hers in a kiss that was both fierce and tender, a vow unspoken yet unbreakable. The dawn came too soon. Scouts returned with grim tidings. The clans had united under one banner, their forces vast, their wrath sharpened. They marched for the Iron Wolves with numbers that dwarfed even Kale's strength. In the war council, his captains argued fiercely. "We cannot hold the gates," one said. "Then we ride out and meet them in the valley," argued another. "To leave the fortress is folly," snapped a third. "We'd be slaughtered in the open." Kyle silenced them with a single word. "Enough." All eyes turned to him. He stood tall, his presence filling the hall like thunder. "We do not flee, we do not cower. We are wolves, and wolves do not bow. We will meet them at the walls, and we will hold." A cheer rose, fierce and defiant. But when the council dispersed, Kale lingered with Elara. She caught his arm, her eyes burning. "You cannot win this war alone." He gazed at her, and in that moment she saw what he tried to hide. Not fear, but resolve, a decision already made. "If they breach the gates," he said softly, "I want you to take the hidden passage beneath the keep. It leads to the mountains. Promise me, Elara." Her heart clenched. "No, Elara, no," she cried, gripping his hands. "Do not speak to me of leaving you. I will not. Wherever you stand, I stand. Whatever fate comes, I face it with you." Kale's jaw tightened, his breath ragged, but he saw the fire in her eyes and knew her vow was as iron as his own. Slowly he drew her against him, his lips pressing to her hair. "Then may the gods have mercy on us both," he whispered. The final battle came with the rising of the moon. The valley glowed with the enemy's torches, stretching like a river of fire up the mountainside. Their war drums shook the stones, their battle cries echoing through the peaks. Upon the walls, Kale's men braced themselves, their banners snapping in the wind. Elara stood among them, her heart pounding, fear clawing at her, but her hand clenched the hilt of a dagger Kale had pressed into her palm. "Not to kill," he had said, But to survive, the gates shuddered with the first blow of the battering ram. Arrows darkened the sky. The battle began. The clash was like nothing Elara had ever imagined. The enemy poured against the walls, ladders rising, warriors swarming like ants upon stone. Kyle moved like a force of nature, rallying his men, his blade cutting through the tide. His roar carried above the chaos, a wolf's cry of defiance. Elara fought too, not with skill, but with courage. She struck at those who came too near, pulled the wounded back, pressed cloth to bleeding wounds with trembling hands. She was no longer a caged bird. She was part of this fight, this family. But the enemy was endless. Hours blurred into one another, the night an endless storm of blood and steel. The walls cracked, the gates buckled, the fortress groaned beneath the weight of the assault. And then the breach, the gates burst inward, a flood of enemies pouring into the yard. Kyle's men fell back, rallying to him in a desperate circle of steel. At the heart of it, Kyle fought like a god of war, his blade drenched, his breath ragged but unyielding. Elara's cry pierced the din as she saw him struck, a spear grazing his side, crimson staining his armor. Still he stood, still he fought, but the numbers pressed closer, and Elara knew with a sick certainty that even Kyle could not hold forever. Her gaze darted to the tower, the great iron bell used to summon the wolves from the mountain. Few remembered it now, a relic of old wars, but if it rang, perhaps allies in hidden valleys would hear. Perhaps hope still lingered. Heart racing, Elara broke from the line, darting through the chaos. Kyle's voice roared after her, but she did not stop. She climbed the tower steps 2 at a time, her lungs burning, her dagger clutched tight. At the top she seized the rope and heaved with all her strength. The bell tolled. Its deep, thunderous cry rolled across the mountains, echoing through every valley, every peak. Again and again she pulled, until her arms shook, until her body screamed. Below, Kyle fought on, but his eyes found her, and in them she saw both fury and pride. The enemy faltered, some glancing nervously at the sound that split the night, and then, faint at first, came an answering howl. Wolves! Dozens, no hundreds of wolves poured from the mountains, great beasts with eyes like fire. They swept into the enemy ranks, sowing chaos, tearing men down in a storm of fangs and fury. The tide turned. Kyle seized the moment, rallying his men with a cry that shook the heavens. Together they drove the enemy back, their blades striking true, their howls joining the wolves in savage harmony. By dawn, the valley was strewn with the dead. The clans were broken, their banners torn, their survivors fleeing into the wilderness. The fortress still stood. Elara found Kyle at the heart of the yard, his armor battered, his body bloodied but unbroken. He leaned on his sword, exhaustion heavy, yet his eyes burned as they met hers. She ran to him, tears streaming, her hands seizing his face. "You're alive," she whispered, her voice breaking. His hand covered hers, strong even in weariness. "Because of you, you saved us all, Elara." Her heart swelled, overflowing, and before the watching warriors, she pressed her lips to his, her kiss fierce, unashamed, a vow made before all. The men cheered, their voices rising in a howl that shook the skies. Kyle drew her close, his voice rough but sure. "No more chains, Elara. From this day, not my captive, not my prize, my bride, my equal, my treasure." Her tears fell freely as she whispered, "And I am yours, Kyle, always." And in the light of the rising sun, amidst blood and ashes, they sealed their bond, not forged by chains or bargains, but by love stronger than war, fiercer than wolves, eternal as the mountains themselves. Chapter 8. The Bride of the Iron Wolf. The snows had begun to melt in the high passes, turning the mountain streams swift and silver. Spring breathed life into the valley again, washing away the scars of war with green and gold. The fortress of the Iron Wolves stood tall against the sky, its banners whole once more, its halls filled with laughter instead of battle cries. Where once there had been only the clang of steel, now there was music, the ring of hammers shaping not weapons but tools, the hum of voices weaving hope into stone, and at the heart of it all, Kyle and Elara. Elara walked the courtyard one morning, her steps light across the worn stones. She carried a basket of herbs, gathered from the slopes with her own hands. The people greeted her with smiles and bows, not as a captive, not as a stranger, but as one of their own. Children ran to her, their laughter ringing, pressing flowers into her palms. She bent to accept them, her heart swelling. Months ago she had thought her life was over, her future stolen. Now it bloomed brighter than she had ever dreamed. At the edge of the yard, she found Kale overseeing the training of his men, his voice carried, firm yet proud, guiding his warriors with patience. The sight of him, strong, unyielding yet softened by the warmth in his eyes when he turned to her, made her breath catch still. "Your hands smell of rosemary," he teased as she approached, brushing his lips across her brow. "And yours of steel," she countered, though her smile betrayed her joy. "Steel keeps us alive," he murmured, sliding his arm around her waist. "But you, Elara, you remind me why life is worth keeping." That evening, the hall filled with their people, long tables laden with food, cups raised in celebration, not of war, but of life after war. Kyle stood, his gaze sweeping the gathered crowd. His voice rang clear. "Months ago, the clans sought to tear us down. They thought us broken, divided, but we are still here, stronger, united, and none of this would be so if not for one woman." Alara's cheeks flushed as all eyes turned to her. Kyle's gaze softened, his words no longer for the hall, but for her alone. "She was given to me as a price, a chain, a captive, yet she chose to stay not in chains but in courage. In her I found not just a bride, but my equal, my heart, my treasure. From this day, let her be known not as the girl sold in betrayal, but as the bride of the Iron Wolf." The hall thundered with cheers. Cups struck tables, voices roared, and the people chanted her name as if it were a banner of victory. Tears welled in Elara's eyes as Kyle drew her close, his lips brushing hers before all. The world seemed to fade, leaving only him, the man who had once been her captor, now her love, her partner, her home. Later, as the firelight dimmed and the revelry softened, Elara and Kyle stood upon the battlements together. The stars spread vast above them, the mountains dark and eternal around them. "Do you regret it?" Kyle asked quietly, his arm draped across her shoulders. She leaned into him, her voice soft but certain. "Not once. You were meant to be my fate, Kyle, not as my conqueror, but as my heart." His lips brushed her hair, and he held her closer, his chest rising with a deep, steady breath. "Then let us write the rest of our days together. No more chains, no more wars, only us and the life we will build." And there, beneath the endless sky, Elara smiled, for she was no longer the girl who had been sold. She was no longer a prize to be traded. She was the treasured bride of the Iron Wolf, and together they were unbreakable.